Hi, I'm sneaking in a 3-book review, mostly all historical fiction, because there are times when one would like to get away from the current universe, and I'm going to pop us into 3 completely different universes. So the first one up today is Alison Goodman's The Benevolent Society of Ill-Mannered Ladies. Now I'm going from further back in time to closer to now in time. This comes to us from HarperCollins. It is a Regency set novel, a la Georgette Hare, that style, that era. And boy, oh boy, this is a romp. This was one of those books which already had me seduced by the cover. I do love my ladies with their pistol and dagger. And I knew that I was going to be in for a lot of fun. And I got a lot of fun. So we've got 2 sisters who are spinsters. They're, they're in their middle-aged, and they are highborn. They're, part of the high society. And I suppose we start the story where they are sort of drawn into a world of sort of misdeed and shenanigans when they're trying to help out a friend who wants to recover some letters from a lover, and they get a sort of taste for this. We've got Augusta and Julia, and they're very different. They're actually twins, and you'll have a lot of fun with them. Augusta has that very sort of highly independent, highly unconventional. They're both literate, which it turns out is not something that was so common back then. And they have a brother under whose sort of, I presume, sort of guidance and possibly under whose control they find themselves, but they are actually financially independent, and this is how they can sort of run around the place and have all these adventures. Now, the adventures are anything but frivolous, light-hearted romps, and this is what I really enjoyed about this. Is you get the sort of the little bit of romance. There's a highwayman, there's a Bow Street runner, there's all sorts of, and there's one big story arc going on that unravels as we go. But there are also 3 sort of cases that these women take on. And we go into territory that's quite, it's about how women lived in those days. So we're looking at what life would have been, if you're a wife, how much under the control of your husband you are. And, he doesn't have to explain what he does or might do away with in terms of, his wife. So there will be one narrative going into this domain of trying to remove a woman from a husband's control. There is child pornography. It doesn't come across like that. It's just these brothels where underage abducted children are taken, and Gus feels she, is compelled by circumstances to intervene and try and save someone or all of them. And in the last one, Bedlams, we have the Mad Women. She peppers this Goodman with true, real serious research, some really nice historical characters, and oh my goodness, the language and the etiquette and the knowing how you refer to your footman and how you can't refer to him this way if he's sort of undercover. Because these women, they may have been, particularly Gus, they have been out there and sort of, being reckless and very brave and courageous, but they weren't men. And if they wanted to get into the underworld and stuff, they did need to, co-opt a couple of the fellas. And that turns out to be an awful lot of fun. Absolutely highly recommend this as an escapist read. That's number 1. Number 2, and great ladies, great women in this one. Actually, the men are fun too, must admit. Second one up, The Beasts of Paris from Stef, by Stef Penney. And this one comes to us from Quercus. And as a historical read, it was meaty and detailed and about something I knew very little about. So we're back in 1871. So she's already forgotten her notes, 1870. And we have 3 main characters. So I must admit, I really love the dynamic of 2 in particular, 2 very believable, very lovely men. So there's one for the fellas. we have one character, Anne, who's she's an inmate, though not sort of bound or locked up in Salpêtre, which is where they treat or literally do shows on the power of the mind and women and hysteria and treatments for traumas, panic attacks, and all sorts of women's conditions that men were interested in, but probably anyway. We shan't go too far into that. We're in the 1870s, and there's this time of civil unrest where the Prussians are at the gate. There's a lot of pressure on the city, and eventually they're under siege. We have a young Canadian Lawrence who works for a photographic company, and the very first time we kind of cross him is in the menagerie, in the Paris menagerie, and this is why it's called Beasts of Paris, or is it? Or is it? And the last character, Ellis, is an American, and this is important. He's an American military surgeon. He's done his time in the Civil War in America and is very disillusioned. This is what he does, and you feel that he wants to kind of divest himself of this person that he becomes, because it's very traumatizing for him. But and it's how these three characters sort of glance off each other when they sort of cross each other in the gardens, admiring the wild animals. Now, as Paris comes under siege, dreadful things happen. Choices have to be made. But I think we have Anne's fascination with certain wild animals, particularly the wild cats. And that gives rise to that sort of myth, urban legend we all know of. There's always a black panther wandering around the countryside, somewhere in France and probably in other countries. But this is, it's kind of, I think, a bit of a wink, but based on historical fact. The dynamic between these two men, Ellis and Lawrence, is fascinating, because Lawrence is only just beginning to understand that maybe who he is and who he might love might not be conventional. So it's just so beautifully done. And Ellis knows what he wants, but in Paris they both have to be discreet. They don't realize, they don't even like each other, I think, at the beginning, but they're trying to be young men had to be discreet. They're also non-nationals, and at a time where they could have been oppressions, their very existence was always compromised. It's an utterly fascinating read, and that those dynamics of, there's another cast, but these as a central cast of these three, I just found it, it's hooked by these three main characters and how they navigate. Do they or do they not survive? Absolutely worth every second I spent on it. And the last one, up, and we're approaching the Edwardian era. This is The Housekeepers by Alex Hay, and that comes to us from Headline Review. So a bit of a humdinger, this one. It's been described variously, but I would say it has that upstairs, downstairs feel, or Downton Abbey, but it's not really pitting to the same way. It's not kind of looking at the dynamics of how you might or might not get on with the upstairs or the downstairs staff. It's more, never underestimate who your downstairs staff are. So it becomes a little bit more, I suppose, it's more a revenge story, or a revenge story. We have amazing women in this, and people from the walks of life that you kind of, it opens out in a Dickensian way into all of the sort of the lower classes and how their lives are. It's set in Park Lane, and I think Hayes says that he wrote this novel so that people could understand, why Mayfair, Park Lane in Mayfair, had these grotesquely palatial, Mac Mansion just doesn't cover it. These huge big houses, sumptuous, but overly opulent. And in this household lives a Miss de Vries, who is constantly, she had lived with her father's recently died, and she's constantly trying to keep everything under control, but she's also cold, distant. And in her household, there are things afoot, shall we put it that way. She has her own foibles, and has a way of treating and sort of not seducing, but kind of mesmerizing some of her housemaids. And we have under this a kind of I suppose like a motley crew of the housekeeper herself, who has recently been dismissed, Mrs. King, and she is central, and she is very wonderful, and she's in control of everything, and you'd really love her to run the bloody country, excuse my French. Then you have a sort of gangland matriarch who runs these sort of gangs that are up to everything, doing everything, in charge of sort of, she kind of rules this petty crime, kind of Peaky Blinders sort of set up. And her reign is kind of constantly under threat. But they're going to organise this heist where they're going to just, for reasons that Mrs. King knows and no one else really questions much, they are going to organise a heist. Bring in the acrobats, the prostitutes, who will all take on a sort of disguise, pass themselves off as what they are not, including said head of the gangland, who comes in as sort of, a skiv at the very bottom, but she gets access to stuff in the house. There's a missing will. There's a butler who's up to no good. And there is a gritty little theme in there of housemaids sort of being ferried out to service the needs of lords, and they're sort of innocent and they want to put a stop to this. So a lot of things happen at once, highly implausible. Tightrope act all the way through, but golly, I loved it. I thought it was one of the best, most diverting, absolutely stunning read. Brilliant fun. Highly recommend again. That's it. I'm just recommending madly, but you're going to have a lot of fun, and you're definitely not going to be too overburdened with the present moment. That's it from me. See you next time.